The closing months of the life of Hollywood icon Tony Curtis were bleak. He passed away at the age of 85. He excluded his 5 children from his $60 million will 4 months prior to his passing. His 6th wife was left everything. However, there is a sinister reality to his choice. He was allegedly controlled and manipulated. Addiction and dysfunction for decades had already shattered the family. The truth about those last several days has been revealed by his daughter. On June 3, 1925, Tony Curtis was born in Manhattan's East Harlem. He wasn't Tony Curtis back then. Bernard Schwartz was his name. The eldest of 3 boys born to impoverished Jewish immigrants from Hungary. His parents were barely making ends meet. The small 2-room flat they shared was located above his father's shuttered tailor shop. Bernard was so poor that he didn't even learn English until he was 6 years old. He felt alienated in his own city since he could only communicate in Hungarian. The Great Depression made matters worse. When Bernard was 8 years old in 1933, his parents were unable to provide for all of their kids. Thus, for a month, they placed him and his younger brother, Julius, in a state-run home. It was not a penalty. It was a matter of survival. However, it felt like abandonment to a youngster. He was altered by that brief absence. That sense of unwelcomeness would remain with him for the rest of his life. Food and clothing were only one aspect of their destitution. It was about being alone, and without a place to go. Tragic events struck when Bernard was 12 years old. He was playing outside with pals, his beloved younger brother Julius. When Julius asked to play with Bernard earlier that day, Bernard instructed him to go play with the other children. He was plagued by that decision. Julius was struck by a truck. When Bernard arrived at the hospital in a hurry, he discovered him unconscious and lying there. He pleaded with him to wake up, to pardon him, to just give him another half hour. However, Julius passed away. Bernard never forgot. If only he could have his brother back, he subsequently claimed to have vowed that day to always be a good guy. He carried that shame with him through all 6 of his marriages, celebrity, and wealth. He also didn't find tranquility in his home life. Helen, his mother, was violent and erratic. She had schizophrenia, although no one realized it at the time. When her sons didn't finish their meals, she would discipline them. She was a constant source of worry for Bernard. Robert, his younger brother, would later be admitted to an institution due to the same ailment. Shouting, anguish, and bewilderment flooded the house. Bernard had never experienced love. He once remarked, "Where are you going to go if your mother doesn't act like she loves you?" So much about his life was revealed by that one inquiry. His need for love and terror followed him everywhere, even to Hollywood, where he allegedly had over 1,000 sexual encounters and 6 marriages. In his heart, he was still yearning for the love he was never given as a kid. By the time he was a teenager, Bernard was having problems. He became a member of a street gang and spent his days stealing little items and skipping school. It wasn't merely for amusement. He was running away. Anything was preferable to returning home. Then, however, something occurred. He was sent to Boy Scout camp by a neighbor who stepped in. That one action altered his course. It provided him with hope and structure. However, it was the movies that really saved him. He would sneak into theaters and sit for hours on end starting when he was 5 or 6 years old. He had something to believe in because of the heroes, the legends, and the darkness. Pretending to be in such movies, he started scaling rooftops in the Bronx. The dream began at that moment. When he was 16, he performed in his first school play, and something snapped. Perhaps, just perhaps, this child from nothing could grow up to be someone. Bernard enlisted in the Navy immediately following his graduation from Seward Park High School in 1943. He was 18. He was enthralled after seeing the Cary Grant film Destination Tokyo. He applied to join the submarine service by forging his mother's signature. He was ordered aboard the USS Proteus, a Pacific support vessel. Although he never seen combat, he did witness history on September 2, 1945. He witnessed the Japanese formally surrender in Tokyo Bay from the deck of his ship, which was about a mile away. The conflict was over. He had just turned 20. He wasted no time in getting home. He enrolled in the dramatic workshop in New York using the GI Bill since he had no intention of pursuing a career. Though he was unaware of it at the time, this one choice would alter everything. It wasn't just any acting school, the dramatic workshop. Erwin Piscator, a theater icon who had fled Nazi Germany, was in charge of it. Future celebrities Rod Steiger, Walter Matthau, and Elaine Stritch trained with Bernard there. Giants like Stella Adler and Lee Strasberg were among his teachers. This play shaped artists, not just taught acting. And it equipped Bernard with the abilities that would eventually enable him to carry big-budget Hollywood productions. Then the good fortune struck. A keen-eyed talent agent named Joyce Selznick saw him at a small Greenwich Village concert. She chose him because he was the most attractive of the boys, he later joked. She saw something in him, whether it was real or not. She made it possible for him to meet with Universal Pictures. He was only 23 when he boarded a plane to Los Angeles in 1948. He sat beside Jack Warner on the aircraft. Warner Brothers CEO even promised to sign him if Universal ever released him. He signed a 7-year contract with Universal. Inspired by the novel Anthony Adverse and a family name, Kurtz, they changed his name from Bernard Schwartz to Anthony Curtis. Soon, people would just call him Tony Curtis. In order to prepare him for adventurous roles, the studio taught him how to ride a horse and how to fence. Hollywood had just started to shape him into a star, even though Curtis acknowledged at the time that he was more interested in money and girls than art. Criss Cross, 1949, was his first motion picture appearance. His presence was evident despite his brief 2-minute appearance as a dancer in a nightclub scene. Burt Lancaster looked on in jealousy as he danced with Yvonne DiCarlo. He had not a single line at all. Nevertheless, the camera adored him. The studio recognized his potential, and viewers recalled his face. He went on to play small parts in Winchester 73 and Sierra, co-starring Jimmy Stewart. He eventually landed his first leading part in The Prince Who Was a Thief in 1951. Tangier was the setting for this exotic adventure, which Universal aggressively promoted. Curtis rose to fame at the age of 26, and audiences adored him. He shared the screen with another up-and-coming talent, Piper Laurie, and performed the majority of his own stunts. The studio decided to put them in 3 more movies because they were so successful together. There were differing opinions among critics. The film was deemed ridiculous by some. Its enthusiasm was adored by others. The box office, however, told the truth. It was well received. Then fame's drawbacks appeared. They typecast Curtis. He was attractive, affable, and physically fit. As a result, he continued to be cast in light adventure roles. In 1952, Flesh and Fury attempted to alter that. In a dramatic piece with darker themes, he portrayed a death boxer. Nevertheless, the majority of his movies at the time were unmemorable. Ali Baba's son, Francis, has no room for the groom. In an attempt to create a strong show reel, he used what he had. Curtis wanted more, but the studios thought he was a heartthrob. When he played Houdini in a 1953 biopic about the well-known escape artist, he underwent his first significant metamorphosis. He co-starred with Janet Leigh, his real-life wife. He even performed his own stunts after a month of training with a magician. He had ice burns from the filming and had to sit in bathtubs filled with ice in one scene. Curtis had an opportunity to demonstrate profundity, but the movie rushed over the facts. For the first time, viewers saw more than just his appearance. Trapeze was the next significant advancement in 1956. In a high-wire circus drama, Curtis co-starred alongside Burt Lancaster and Gina Lollobrigida. It was a physically demanding role. Curtis even tried the risky triple somersault on film, but he had to train to do aerial feats. The gamble paid well. 3 times its budget, the film brought in $15.5 million at the box office. In both the US and the UK, it was among the year's highest earners. Additionally, it made Curtis seem like a credible dramatic actor. However, the sweet scent of victory in 1957 was what made all the difference. Curtis put in a lot of effort to get the part of Sidney Falco, a shady press agent who will stop at nothing to advance in his career. He was not wanted to play the role by Universal. They were concerned it would damage his reputation. Curtis, however, refused to back down. He was once more teamed with Burt Lancaster, who portrayed a chilly and influential newspaper columnist. Critics were taken aback by Curtis's performance. He was clever, slimy, desperate, and quick-witted. His role as a heartthrob has changed. He was portraying a human being with all of his imperfections. It was later described as the best performance of his career by film critic Pauline Kael. The film was a failure at the time. Viewers who were anticipating a light romance lead were unsure of how to interpret it. However, the movie held up well over time. Today, it is regarded as a masterpiece of 1950s film. Many people think Curtis ought to have received an Oscar nomination. The year 1958 had been a watershed for Tony Curtis. In The Defiant Ones that year, he delivered the most impactful performance of his career. He portrayed a racist fugitive who was shackled to Sidney Poitier's persona. Curtis showed that he was capable of doing significant work in the unvarnished and daring film. After being screened at the Berlin Film Festival in June, where Poitier took home the Silver Bear for Best Actor, it was released on September 27, 1958. The movie received 9 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. Curtis and Poitier both had Best Actor nominations, but David Niven won for distinct tables. The rental income in the United States and Canada was $2.75 million, whereas the budget was $778,000. Off-screen, Curtis also revealed his own self. Above the title, he demanded that Poitier be given equal billing. History was made with that move. Poitier was the first black actor to receive a Best Actor nomination. Director Stanley Kramer was impressed by their close bond in the movie. Later, Poitier stated, "I sense that Tony is doing it, so you don't need to worry about whether he could stand up to me." Curtis returned to the public eye a year later, and some people found him attractive. However, creating it was a nightmare. Marilyn Monroe was erratic, anxious, late, and frequently drunk on set. The tension was exacerbated by the fact that Curtis had dated her briefly in 1949. The filming process was delayed by 29 days and cost $500,000 more than anticipated. Frustrated, Curtis once made a remorseful remark in which he likened kissing Monroe to kissing Hitler. Monroe, according to director Billy Wilder, was her own worst adversary. "Monroe didn't cause me any trouble. Monroe and Monroe had issues." Jack Lemmon and Curtis, meanwhile, put in hours of drag for their parts. Lemmon even had a lasting irritation from the girdle and nylon stockings. The movie debuted on December 16, 1958, in Los Angeles. Monroe experienced a miscarriage on that day, and subsequently attributed it to the strain of filming. After taking too many drugs, her helper remembered discovering her asleep on the ground with vomit all over her face. Nevertheless, the film was completed and went on to become a classic. Curtis played another dangerous character in Spartacus in 1960. He portrayed Antoninus, a slave who works for Crassus, played by Laurence Olivier. A sequence in the movie alluded to Crassus' bisexuality, which was unheard of at the time. Boundaries were pushed by the well-known snail and oyster spa scene. It was cut at the request of the Catholic Church's film watchdog agency. Olivier and Curtis struggled to hold on to it. They only had one take. In 1991, years later, the scene was reconstructed. Olivier was dead. Thus, his voice was dubbed by Anthony Hopkins. Had his own lines re-recorded. Later, he referred to Stanley Kubrick as a genius with actors and declared that he was his favorite director. Curtis was able to compete with the Titans in the massively successful movie. Curtis featured in The Great Imposter in 1961. He portrayed the real-life character Ferdinand Di Mara, who forged his way through almost 30 professions, including surgery. Curtis enchanted viewers with a blend of comedy and emotion, and the film brought in $3 million. Although he didn't resemble Di Mara at all, many pointed out that he perfectly captured the character. Di Mara performing 19 procedures on troops before being apprehended was one of the story's most outrageous elements. By demonstrating Di Mara's goodness, Curtis was able to make the part work. Merely a man attempting to prove himself in a society that valued credentials above all else. Curtis was able to delve deep without losing his charm in this performance. However, Curtis began to mainly rely on light comedies by the middle of the 1960s. He played a tabloid reporter in Sex and the Single Girl who pretended to be someone else in order to expose a famous psychotherapist. Over time, the movie didn't hold up. It only made $6,490 when it was re-released in France in 2002. The Great Race followed in 1965. At the time, it was the priciest comedy produced. Despite spending 2 weeks at the top of the US box office in October, it failed to place in the year's top 10. In 1961, Curtis founded his own production firm. Wishing to take charge of his professional life, he produced at least 8 comedies from 1964 to 1967. Although these jobs helped him pay his bills, they damaged his reputation. Critics said he was only coasting through unmemorable sex comedies and no longer regarded him as a serious actor. His previous roles in The Defiant Ones and Sweet Smell of Success felt like far-off recollections. The Boston Strangler followed. It was a startling comeback to form in 1968. Albert DeSalvo, the real-life murderer who killed 13 women in Boston, was portrayed by Curtis. He used body padding, black contacts, and makeup to change the way he looked. He was little recognized by audiences. Split-screen sequences were employed in the movie to show the investigation and the murderer. It wasn't until almost halfway through the film that Curtis appeared. He took control of the screen when he did. It was hailed as his best performance ever by critics. Curtis was surprisingly good in the role, according to Roger Ebert. According to one critic, he was frightfully skilled at portraying a man who seemed regular on the outside but had a terrible side. In spite of the positive reviews, the movie didn't do very well at the box office. Hollywood didn't appear to notice that Curtis had once again demonstrated his acting prowess. Tony Curtis led a life beyond Hollywood. He experienced a number of them, each more dramatic than the one before it. As his popularity in films began to wane in the early 1970s, Curtis bravely transitioned to television. In 1971, he and Roger Moore collaborated on a high-profile action comedy series called The Persuaders, which cost an incredible £100,000 per episode. Roughly £1.8 million in today's currency. They blended Moore's British elegance with Curtis's American appeal as they soared around Europe, Britain, France, Italy, and Spain. However, when ABC scheduled the show to air against Mission Impossible, it was doomed in the US. The American audience was unimpressed. Nevertheless, the series became a huge popularity throughout Europe, particularly in Russia, Italy, Sweden, Germany, and France. For decades, fans continued to watch it. For their performances, Curtis and Moore were even honored in France and Germany. Curtis made a second attempt in 1975 when he featured in McCoy as a fashionable con artist with a gambling problem who defeated enemies and gave back stolen money using intricate tactics. It reminded me of The Sting on TV. Its team was strong. Co-stars like Roscoe Lee Brown, a clever storyline, and renowned directors. However, it was unable to compete with powerful players like McCloud or Columbo. NBC terminated the show after only one pilot and 4 lengthy episodes. Before it ever started, it was finished. Curtis remained persistent. He made a comeback with Vega in 1978, portraying Slick Roth, a cunning casino boss. Curtis felt completely at home in Las Vegas, where the show was situated. He brought authentic Las Vegas attitude to the screen in 17 episodes spread across 3 seasons. He was adored by critics. They claimed that he was humorous, smooth, and effortlessly cool, all qualities that fans had come to anticipate from Tony Curtis. Under neon lights and palm trees, Curtis continued to shine while many of his former film peers faded away. Even though he had fewer film parts in the 1980s and 1990s, he continued to make an impression. He was nominated for an Emmy in 1980 for his performance as Scarlett O'Hara war producer David O. Selznick. He co-starred with Kim Novak in The Mirror Crack that same year. He also played more tragic roles, such as the real-life mobster Sam Giancana and the delusional senator in Insignificance. In Princess Mafia. But Curtis ran into a wall in 1984. He sought treatment for his drug and alcohol problems at the Betty Ford Clinic. He grabbed up a paintbrush at that point and didn't put it down. Acting became less important. Curtis made sporadic appearances in the 1990s, such as in the independent 1993 film Naked in New York. He received some new recognition in 1991 when Spartacus was re-released, particularly for a previously prohibited bath scene starring Laurence Olivier. Curtis, however, had moved on. He began to prioritize art over performing. Painting was his real interest by the 2000s. He continued to perform on occasion, even going on tour in a stage rendition of Some Like It Hot at the age of 77. He portrayed Osgood Fielding, the person who made the well-known statement that no one is flawless. On sitcoms like Roseanne and Lois and Clark, he frequently played meta versions of himself, turning his TV roles into meta roles. He hosted Hollywood Babylon, a program based on notorious Hollywood history, from 1992 to 1993. By that point, he was candid about his true feelings. He claimed that although he is no longer very interested in making movies, he still paints often. Even the Metropolitan Museum of Art displayed his surrealist paintings, which drew inspiration from Picasso and Van Gogh. Until his death on September 29, 2010, he continued to paint. However, there was a chaotic personal life hidden behind all the glitz. His first marriage to Janet Leigh, an actress, began happily ever after. Concerned that it would destroy his career, studio management attempted to halt it. Jerry Lewis was a witness at his 1951 marriage to her. Jamie Lee Curtis was one of their 2 daughters. However, everything fell apart in 1955. Curtis discovered a letter addressed to Lee from a different man. The neighbors could hear them fighting loudly. Although Lee denied having an affair, the trust was lost. "Whatever I was, Janet didn't need me," Curtis stated. In private, their marriage was finished, yet it continued in public for another 7 years. 1961 was a bad year. The 36-year-old Curtis fell in love with his 17-year-old co-star Christine Kaufman while they were filming Terra's Bulba in Argentina. Their relationship had a clear and unsettling chemistry. The connection was kept under wraps while filming, and she was only a teenager. Curtis left his wife and children behind when production came to a close in early 1962. He and Kaufman lived together in Europe until she became 18, at which point they relocated to the US. His marriage to Lee had formally ended by September. She got married to someone else the following day. She was married for more than 40 years. The surprise visit from Lee made it much more devastating. To the set of Terra's Bulba. She spotted Kaufman and Curtis together when she got there. Witnesses reported that she immediately became ill and pale. It was humiliating, public, and final. Curtis had made no effort to conceal it. She was destroyed in that moment. Another major factor in their demise was Curtis' jealousy. He accused Lee of having relationships repeatedly, despite the fact that he had cheated on her. Curtis got so suspicious that he recruited private investigators to follow her while she was filming The Manchurian Candidate with Frank Sinatra. He didn't care that they couldn't find anything. What he wanted to believe, he did. Jamie Lee, their daughter, later said that everything was tainted by his passion. He even claimed that she had slept with delivery workers. He was sleeping all about himself in the meantime. Jamie Lee said she couldn't save their broken marriage even as a child and claimed to have known her father very little growing up. Curtis had 6 marriages. He married Kaufman in 1963, the year she turned 18, after divorcing Lee. They separated in 1968, yet they had 2 daughters. He wed model Leslie Allen in the same year. 2 sons were born to them: Benjamin and Nicholas. At age 23, Nicholas overdosed on drugs and died. Some claim that Curtis's subsequent marriage to Andrea Savio, which lasted from 1984 to 1992, was not even genuine. He wed Lisa Deutsch in 1993. That was over in a year. Then, in 1998, at the age of 73, he wed Jill Vandenberg, a 31-year-old lingerie model. The difference in age? 42 years old. "I would never be caught dead with a woman society thought was old enough to be my wife," he said in response to the question of why he married someone so young. This union continued till his passing. She received a large portion of his wealth. The world was horrified by Jamie Lee Curtis. When she disclosed that she and her father, Tony Curtis, had previously used cocaine and freebased substances. She made no justifications or used evasive language to hide. She remarked, "I once did cocaine and freebased with my dad." Although it only occurred once, that one instance perfectly captured the Curtis family's lengthy history of addiction. Jamie's path to substance abuse started out in silence. She was prescribed painkillers in 1989 following a modest plastic surgery procedure to address her swollen eyelids. After a few years, she was living a second life, stealing from her sister Kelly, and concealing medicines. She then acknowledged that she turned into a thief and a liar. Nobody was aware of her use. The cheerful actress was spiraling, but no one noticed. The month of February 1999 marked a turning point. Jamie entered her first meeting for recovery. She came clean to her husband, Christopher Guest, that evening. The secret was out. She then began keeping track of each clean day after that. She has been sober for 9,125 days in 25 years by February 2024. She proudly and candidly shared the milestone on Instagram. But there was suffering behind her joy. The kind of suffering that has been inherited by subsequent generations. 1994 was the year that hurt the most. Nicholas Curtis, Jamie's half-brother, overdosed on heroin and died. He was just 23. What remained of the family was devastated by his passing. Jamie then claimed that addiction had ruined the lives of her ancestors for decades. Things were already tense at the time. Only Jamie continued to communicate with Tony Curtis, despite the fact that he had 6 children. Friendships had been severed. Not only was Nicholas's death heartbreaking, it served as a warning, a reflection of what may have happened to Jamie had she not halted. In many respects, it saved her, but it also haunted her. She stayed clean by using that anguish. She even said that the largest thing she had ever done was to get sober. Greater than her union. More than becoming a mother. Greater than her professional life. However, neither Jamie nor Nicholas were the cause of the family issues. Tony was the first person they spoke to. He was renowned in Hollywood. However, things were disintegrating at home. He struggled with drinking. He took cocaine. He took heroin. He also went through wives as if he were switching jobs. 6 marriages, consecutively. Jamie once claimed that 13 divorces had occurred in her immediate family. 13, she added, I have often struggled with the idea of love, above a picture of her parents, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh. It was all in that one statement. The many ends had influenced her perspective on relationships. Heated disputes over custody and unfulfilled commitments. Tony was sober for a brief time. He attended recovery sessions and made an effort to put things right for 3 years. However, it was short-lived. Jamie herself said as much. It failed to adhere. Furthermore, any mending that occurred during that period was insufficient. The damage was already done when he passed away in 2010 at the age of 85. Chronic lung illness and years of addiction took their toll, but he passed away from cardiac arrest. One of Tony's wives, Leslie Allen, joined the mayhem as well. Although there isn't much legal proof of her drinking, the Curtis family's custody disputes suggest more serious issues. Jamie would go on to say that addiction ran in her family. And everything is impacted when it penetrates that deeply. Who gets the children? Who is trusted? Who remains? Who departs? Courts frequently use monitoring programs like SoberLink in families like hers to ensure that a parent is sober before allowing them to spend time with their child. That's how trust gets brittle. When addiction takes over, shaky love feels like that. Just 4 months before he passed away from cardiac arrest in May 2010, Tony Curtis did something unexpected. The Hollywood icon revised his will at the age of 85, excluding his 5 living children from his $60 million estate. Among them was his daughter Jamie Lee Curtis, who is among the most well-known figures in Hollywood. They weren't simply left out by the new will. It explicitly said that they would receive nothing and listed every one of them. Just a chilly last statement that he was purposefully leaving them out, with no justification or explanation. His 6th wife, Jill, who was 42 years younger than him, inherited the whole estate. Everyone was astonished by this abrupt transformation, which occurred while Tony's health was deteriorating. His children have received an equal share of his fortune till then. The disinheritance was practically impossible to contest in court due to the new will's extremely detailed legal wording. I acknowledge the existence of my children and have purposefully and fully chosen not to provide for them, he wrote. Any argument that they were accidentally left out was dismissed by that single sentence. Allegra, his distraught and perplexed daughter, went public. She made a strong implication that Jill had influenced the move in an interview from 2011. She said, I don't need to say her name, but everyone knew who she was referring to. Allegra claimed that the will didn't seem to be her father's. She pointed out something odd, and she thought Tony had been duped. Jamie Lee's 2 children received nothing, while 5 of Tony's grandchildren received $30,000 apiece. It was intimate. It felt like a target. The auction followed. Tony's personal belongings were hammered in Beverly Hills a year after his passing. The sale brought in almost $1 million, which was twice as much as analysts had predicted. Only a little portion of the sales went to a charity they founded, the majority went to Jill. Intimate and iconic objects were sold. His Some Like It hot jacket sold for $46,875. $53,000 was the price of a Warhol print. $125. Even his plaque on the Walk of Fame sold for $10,000. According to his kids, they were unaware of it. This is not what my dad would have wanted, Allegra remarked. However, the auction firm maintained that Tony had made the arrangements himself before to his passing. Kelly Curtis didn't only address reporters. She appeared in court. She claimed that her father had been coerced into altering his will in a lawsuit she filed in Las Vegas. Terms like duress, deception, and undue influence were used in the court documents. The family's best defense against what they perceived to be a betrayal was this. Jill stood up for herself. She claimed that Tony had discussed the adjustments with his children and that he had decided to do so due to long-standing problems with them. But many were unable to overlook the age difference. Jill ended up getting everything, despite being younger than Tony's eldest daughter.